Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. 1 second. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. I bear witness that no one deserves to be worshipped except Allah Ta'ala, the one who has no partner and no similar, the one who has no length and no width and no depth and no perimeter, the one who is not a volume and is not in a place. And how can he be in a place when he existed before time and space? He speaks without sound, letter, or language, not Arabic, Hebrew, nor Korean. He's not light. He's not a soul. He has nothing in common with human beings. He's not in the direction of up, down, right, left, front, nor back. And whatever you imagine in your mind, Allah is different than that. He created everything except himself, including you and your actions. Nothing happens except by his will, both good and bad, he destined to happen. And I bear witness that our noble, unrivaled Master Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the slave of Allah, his final messenger, and the best of all of God's creations. May Allah unite us with him in paradise and grant us to drink from his basin. And may Allah increase us in patience, humility, knowledge, and comprehension. And may he help us to put our knowledge into practice and grant us all sincere intentions. Ameen. Before we start the lesson, I remind you again, once we complete this book, the next text that we'll be doing is this one. It's called The Straight Path, As-Siratul Mustaqim. It's a text in Aqidah, so we'll be switching the subject up a little bit, but it's a very brilliant text, mashallah, and I'm excited to start it once we get there. I'm also going to announce to you now that I'm going to be traveling for a little over a month. So there'll be, several weeks where I won't show up for class. We still have this week as well as the next 2 weeks for us to have this lesson, but then after that, there'll be a big gap. If Allah wills, then we'll finish this book before my travel, and we'll start the next book after I return. But we'll see what happens. I don't want to rush through this just for the sake of timing. That said, we are still in the midst of this book, the 7 Hadith. We're on Hadith number 6. The 6th Hadith is the Hadith where our Prophet ﷺ advised us that if we do something wrong, if we do something sinful, then we should follow it up by doing a good deed that erases it. And so in order to do that, in order for us to put this into practice, what we need to do is we need to first learn what the sins are so that we can avoid doing them, but also so that if we do fall into them, that we can do a good deed afterwards to wipe it out. We are on, in my copy, page 58, where it says Sins of the Private Parts, section 7, Sins of the Private Parts. MashaAllah. It says, among the sins of the private parts are to commit adultery or fornication, zina. This Arabic word zina, it doesn't translate easily into English. The English word fornication is called zina in Arabic, but the English word adultery is also called zina in Arabic. So it's sort of like one word that applies to both. It says, that is, to insert the head of the penis into the vagina. So when we say sexual intercourse, what we mean is that the head of the penis entered into the vagina. This is the definition of sexual intercourse according to the Sharia. So for a person to do that with a person that you are not entitled under the Islamic law to do that with, then that is called zina. Okay. To be more specific, if a man does this with a woman who is neither his wife nor his concubine, then this would be zina. Okay, there's a statutory penalty that comes with this crime. So if we were living under, a Sharia law situation, then the person who has ever consummated a valid marriage at any point in his life, if that person commits zina and is convicted, then his punishment would be stoning until he's dead. As for the person who had never consummated a valid marriage in his life. If that person commits zina, then his punishment, if he's free, would be 100 lashes and a year of exile. As for the person who's a slave, his punishment is half half the punishment of the free person. So whether he ever consummated a valid marriage or not, his punishment would be 50 lashes and half a year of exile. You should know that death is obviously the most severe of all of the statutory punishments in the Sharia. And of the ones that are not death, 100 lashes is the highest number of lashes of all the statutory punishments. So you should understand from this that zina is one of the absolute worst sins that a person can commit. It is one of the absolute worst. So, there's a lesson in that for all of us. Let us not get corrupted by the culture which exists around us. This culture of America, which is, very permissive of sexual promiscuity, where people, teenagers even, brag about having already been with multiple people, where teenagers have the nerve to even laugh and ridicule someone who's been chaste, someone who has not committed zina. It's really kind of, ridiculous, this country that we live in. But these messages, they're coming not only from the people around us, they're coming from television, they're coming from the songs people listen to, they're coming from the movies. It's like we're surrounded by this influence. So the Muslim has to be very strong to make sure he continues to regard these things as ugly behaviors, which is what they are. Okay, we don't want to look at zina as something that, is merely something Muslims don't do. No, we need to understand that it's among the worst things that any person can do. In the list of the absolute worst sins, the worst sin of all is kufr, because it takes you out of Islam. And unless you repent before death, it necessitates a never-ending torture. The second worst sin is to kill someone unrightfully. And number 3 in the list is zina. Okay, it is one of the absolute worst things, worst acts that any human being can do. So let's not look at it lightly, because that's what this very satanic culture which exists around us, that's what they want us to think. And for you men out there, some of you who maybe cheat on your wives, just know that this is among the worst things that you could do. It's baffling to me that some people, their minds are so twisted that they think something like snitching is this terrible thing that they would never, ever, ever do. But then they'll cheat on their own wife. Or they'll, be with a girlfriend without even marrying her in the first place. It's like, man, your whole priorities are so jacked up. So jacked up. Number 2, it says, number 2, to commit sodomy. That is to insert the head of the penis into the anus. So sodomy is also one of the sins of the private parts. Sodomy occurs when the head of the penis is inserted into the anus of a human, whether that human is male or female. It's still sodomy if it goes into the anus. This is haram. Now, if a man does this to his wife or his concubine, okay, it is still haram. Okay, but in that case, he will not receive the statutory punishment of zina. Okay, so let me say that again. If a person commits sodomy, even though it's not sex, under the Sharia, it gets the same punishment that sex gets, which means if it's zina, meaning the man penetrated another man or penetrated a woman who's not his wife or his concubine, then it counts like zina and it gets the punishment of zina. But if the man does it for his wife or does it to his concubine, in this case, it's not considered to be zina, but it is haram. It's forbidden for the man to do that, forbidden for the woman to allow him to do that. But in this case, he does not get the statutory punishment because of what's called shubha. The fact that he's entitled to this woman's body presents a shubha, which is sufficient that he doesn't get the statutory punishment, but he's not permitted to continue to do that. It says the penalty for the free sodomizer, by sodomizer I mean the one who did the penetrating. The penalty for the free sodomizer is the same as the adulterer and fornicator. However, the penalty for the sodomized, meaning the one who was penetrated, is 100 lashes and 1 lunar year in exile. This is regardless of that person's marriage status. And the slave receives half of this penalty, as is customary for the slave to get half. So the slave would get 50 lashes and half a year of exile. Number 3, for one to commit bestiality, that is, to have sexual intercourse with animals, even if one owns them. So don't think that because you own the animal, you can do what you want with it. Okay, some people, they might think, oh, well, if I own a human woman, I'm entitled to have sex with her. He might think, therefore, that owning, a sheep or something entitles him to do stuff with it, and that is not the case. Bestiality is haram. Even if you own the animal, you may not do that. Number 4, to masturbate. Okay, whether it's by your own hand, it says, or by the hand of other than one's wife or female slave. So if one were to use his own hand to do it, this is a sin of the private parts. If one were to allow his wife to do that for him, it would not be sinful. This is permissible. Or his concubine to do it, it would not be sinful. This is permissible. But if he allowed anyone else, not his wife, not his concubine, whether it's himself or anyone else, to allow them to do this, this would be haram. Similarly, if the penis penetrates any body part other than the 2 that we mentioned so far, so if the head of the penis enters into a place other than the vagina or the anus, then this also has the ruling of masturbation. Okay, so depending on who does it, it will be haram. Okay, if he does this with his wife or his concubine, it will not be haram. Number 5, to copulate with the woman having menstrual or postpartum bleeding. Yes, so among the things that's haram is for the man to have sexual intercourse with a woman while she is having her period or while she's experiencing postpartum bleeding. This is haram even if there's a barrier. Like say the man is wearing a condom, it is still haram. This is haram even if that woman is his own wife or his own concubine. It's haram because she's bleeding. It says, or to copulate with the woman whose menstruation or postpartum bleeding had terminated, but she did not perform her ghusl yet. This is another important detail that's important to mention. Yes, it's haram to have sex with your wife while she's on her period. But what happens when her bleeding stops? When her period is over? Is it now permissible for you to have sex? The answer is no, not until she makes her ghusl. Sex does not become permissible until after her ghusl. So that period in between when the bleeding stops and the ghusl is done, even in that period, it's haram for you to lay with your wife, and haram for the wife to permit the husband to lay with her during that time. It says, or it, talk about the ghusl here, or it was performed without the proper intention. Okay, so if a person made ghusl but without the proper intention, like for example, say when her period was over, she just wanted to take a shower in order to be clean, for her body to be more fresh. This is not a ghusl. In order for the ghusl to be valid, you must have the intention of performing an obligatory ghusl, or the intention of lifting the major Hadeeth, or some intention of that sort. If your only purpose for making that ghusl is just to be clean, then this is not valid as a ghusl. Okay. Keep in mind, though, that if the wife is a person of the book, okay, it's permissible for Muslim men to marry a woman from the people of the book. Because this woman does not have Iman, none of her intentions are valid. Okay, none of her intentions are valid. So, what happens if the man is married to a woman who's from the people of the book and she has her period? Well, he's not permitted to lie with her while she's on her period. And once her period is over, he's not permitted to lie with her until she makes ghusl. And she can't make a valid ghusl because she doesn't have a valid intention. What do you do? In this case, this woman, she may make a ghusl without an. She makes a ghusl simply for the purpose of being permissible for her husband again. This is what her intention is. And for this one, this is like an exception. This will be valid for her as a ghusl, but only for the purpose of being permissible for her husband. It would not permit her, for example, to touch the mushaf or to make salat. But this ghusl that she makes, it does serve the purpose of then permitting the husband to lie with her again. It says, or without some of its conditions being satisfied. Similarly, if a woman, Muslim or person of the book, if she makes her ghusl, but without some of the conditions being satisfied, this means the ghusl is not valid, which means the man still is forbidden from lying with her. What's an example of making a ghusl with the conditions not satisfied? It would be like if the woman's wearing fingernail polish when she makes her ghusl. It means there's a part of her body that the major Hadeeth was not removed from, and therefore her ghusl is not complete. Inshallah, that's understood. Number 6, to disclose one's unlawful nakedness in front of those who are prohibited from looking at it. So among the sins of the private part is for you to fail to cover your nakedness, to cover up your aura, if you are in a place where someone can see your aura or potentially someone could see your aura. Okay? If that's the case, then you've committed a sin of the private parts, unless the only person who's able to see your aura or potentially able to see your aura is someone who's allowed to see your aura. In that case, it's not haram. So, for example, for a man to uncover his aura when he's in the bedroom with the door closed and locked, and the only other person in there is his wife, this is not haram. She's allowed to see that. Okay? MashaAllah. It says, or to disclose one's unlawful nakedness while alone for no reason. Also among the sins of the private parts is to be naked, for your aura to be showing, even if you're completely alone. Okay, if you're like in your bedroom with the door closed and the curtains drawn and nobody can see you, you're completely in private, and you've taken off your clothes for no legitimate reason. This is also haram, and it's counted among the sins of the private parts. There are legitimate reasons why a person might uncover his aura. Among those reasons are to change his clothes, or to take a bath, or to use the restroom, or to lie with his wife, or even just to cool off. If he's very hot and he needs to cool off, if he's in private and no one can see him, he's alone, or maybe the only other person there is someone who's allowed to see him. In this case, yes, he can uncover his privates for the purpose of cooling off. This is a valid reason. Number 7. Among the sins of the private parts is to face the Qibla or turn one's back to it while urinating or defecating without placing a barrier between oneself and the Qibla. Okay, what this doesn't mention here is that this ruling applies only if you are outside. Okay, if you are like out in the field using the bathroom, it's your responsibility to make sure that you're not facing the Qibla, nor do you have your back to the Qibla. Okay, so you have 360 degrees in which to face. You know, one of those degrees is towards the Qibla, and one of those degrees is with your back to the Qibla. That gives you, 358 degrees to face. Or if you're taking the opinion that the Qibla is a direction, rather than like the building itself, then you have about 45 degree region, which is the region in which the Qibla is facing, and another 45-degree behind you, which is a region where that your back is facing. You need to make sure neither your front nor your back is facing the Qibla, and so that leaves 270 degrees in which you can face. All right, don't fall into the trap of thinking, well, if you can't face the Qibla or turn your back to it, how can you face anywhere? The answer is that you can. It's actually quite easy. Okay, so you want to, if you're outside, this includes even in an alley or someplace, make sure you're not facing the Qibla nor turning your back to it when you urinate or defecate. But if you are facing the Qibla or have your back to the Qibla, then even then, it would be permissible. You would avoid the sin that comes from doing that if you placed a barrier between you and the Qibla. So say the Qibla is in front of you and you're peeing. If you place a barrier between you and the Qibla, well then now it's not haram for you to pee in the direction of the Qibla. Or if the Qibla is behind you, if you put a barrier behind you between your back and the Qibla, then it would not be permissible for you to use the bathroom with your back to the Qibla, as long as the barrier is there. It says, the barrier must be, these are the conditions for the barrier. In order for it to count as a valid barrier, certain conditions must be met. It says the barrier must be 2/3 of a cubit or more in height and not more than 3 cubits away. I remind you that a cubit is the distance from the tip of the middle finger to the elbow of an average sized man. It's roughly 47 or 48 centimeters. It's about 1.5 feet is 1 cubit. So this barrier, if it needs to be at least 2/3 of a cubit high, that means it needs to be at least 1 foot high. And it can't be more than 3 cubits away. That means it needs to be no more than 4.5 feet away from you. Anything that meets those two criteria counts as a valid barrier. So if you have a tree, for example, in front of you, or a short wall, or I don't know, a fire hydrant or something, these things all count as a barrier. Then it says, but if the place of urination and defecation was prepared for that purpose. So here we're talking about like a bathroom. Bathrooms were built for the purpose of people urinating and defecating there. Okay, or like a latrine, like a porta potty, or if you dig a ditch, there are latrines. If you're at a camp, there's a campsite where you're going to be camping there for a long time, like say several months, they might dig a latrine and have a special area for everybody at the camp to use the restroom there. Any place that's been prepared for the purpose of people going to the restroom there, it says then one may face any direction. If you're in such a place, you may face any direction you want because the place is prepared for the purpose of using the restroom. So the bathroom in your house is an example of a place that's prepared for that purpose. So it doesn't matter if your toilet is facing the Qibla or has its back to the Qibla, because you're in a place that's prepared for this purpose, it's not haram no matter what direction it's facing. Number 8, to urinate or defecate on a grave. Okay, this is haram for you to pee on the grave of a Muslim or to defecate on the grave of a Muslim. This is haram, whether or not that Muslim was buried in the Muslim cemetery. So for sure, to go to the Muslim cemetery and do that is haram. But even if you're not in a cemetery, let's say it's just out in the field, a Muslim was buried somewhere, if you know that that person was a Muslim, it's forbidden for you to pee or defecate on his grave. Number 9, to urinate in a mosque, even if it was done in a container, and to urinate on the exalted. What does that mean? It means that there are certain places where you're not allowed to urinate or defecate. Among those places is the mosque, the masjid. You may not pee in the mosque. Okay. One reason is because you might get pee on the mosque itself, which of course is forbidden. But even if you knew you weren't going to get pee on the mosque, like say you had some kind of container where the pee would go in the container and you knew it wouldn't get on the mosque, or say there was a toilet there. You know, a lot of people in the United States, they build these nice buildings uh, for us to pray in, and they put bathrooms on the inside. Well, it's forbidden to have a bathroom in a mosque, okay? Because it's forbidden to pee in a mosque. Even if you're peeing into the toilet, you cannot pee inside a mosque. It's haram. So these places, you know, and this is something all of you should double check at the actual places where, you know, you go to make salat. You need to see what the dimensions of the masjid actually are. Because sometimes what happens is you build a building where the walls, you know, the walls enclose a certain space, and then the bathrooms are like off to the side or maybe way in the back, and the actual masjid takes up a smaller space than what's enclosed by the walls. So like the bathrooms could be outside of the masjid, but still inside of the building, because the masjid is not the building is not necessarily the masjid. The masjid is the place that was set aside for use as a masjid, which may be like a portion of the building. So you're going to want to, you know, verify in your communities where the borders of the actual masjid are, and make sure that there's no bathroom within those borders. Uh, not on a floor above or a floor below either, because the area above a masjid is still part of the masjid, and the area below the masjid is still part of the masjid. And just like how you can't pee or poop in a masjid, you also cannot pee or poop on anything that the religion considers to be exalted. So if the Sharia says there's something that is worthy of your respect, then you cannot pee on it. Like the Quran, for example, or a book of Hadeeth, or a book of Fiqh, or a book of Aqidah, or any book containing any Islamic knowledge, or any paper that has any of the names of Allah written on it, or the name of any of the prophets written on it. These are all things that are exalted in the religion, so you may not pee on it or poop on it. Similarly, at Hajj, there are uh, sometimes at Hajj, there are some places that are narrow, and yet all the people of Hajj need to go through that space, such as like between the two mountains of Safa and Marwa. All of the people on Hajj have to go between those mountains like that. And so for that reason, it's haram for a person to pee or poop there. Okay, you need to leave that space free for the people who are making Hajj and Umrah. Number 10, the last one in this section, it says to neglect circumcision until after becoming pubescent. The ruling of the Shafi'i school is that it is an obligation for all Muslims to be circumcised, whether you're male or female. This is the ruling of the Shafi'i school. Circumcision should be done on the seventh day, but it doesn't have to be done on that day. So according to the Shafi'i school, it's haram for you to not get circumcised or not circumcise your children. It says, this is allowed according to Imam Malik, however. Again, I remind you, this book is according to the Shafi'i school. So I'm giving you the rulings of the Shafi'i school. If for some reason I put in here a ruling from another school, it's only because doing so will make your life significantly easier. So yes, according to the Malikis, it is recommended to be circumcised and not obligatory to be circumcised. So therefore, if any of you are not circumcised and you're not looking forward to becoming circumcised, then you can go ahead and take the opinion of Imam Malik, which says that you do not have to go run and get that done. Are there any questions about these sins of the private parts? Yes, there is such a thing as circumcision for females. A portion of the skin that the clitoris is beneath, a portion of that skin is removed. This is female circumcision. It has the purpose of reducing the woman's desire. Please do not go on the internet and look up the things that are done in Africa, because the female circumcision that's commonly done in Africa is not done according to the Sharia description of how it should be done. And please don't ask me what the Sharia description is of how it should be done. I've said as much as I'm willing to say on this issue. Any more questions about sins of the private parts? Okay, in that case, we'll go to section 8, sins of the foot. Among the sins of the foot are to walk in order to commit a sin, such as walking to ask the ruler to inflict harm on a Muslim, or to walk to kill a Muslim unrightfully, or the like. Okay. This is an important concept to understand, which is that just like how certain acts are a sin in and of themselves, every movement you make for the purpose of committing that sin is also a sin. So say, for example, somebody wants to steal a car. He sees a car, 2 blocks away. He wants to steal it. Every step that he takes towards that car with the intention of stealing it, each one of those steps is a separate sin. So if he took 10 steps and then changed his mind, after 10 steps, he's decided, you know what, stealing's haram. I'm not going to do it. I repent lillahi ta'ala. Okay, he may have repented from his intention to steal the car, but did he repent from those steps that he took? Because those steps are also sins, and he needs to repent from them as well. Any step that you take with the purpose of committing a sin is itself a sin. And it gives examples in here. It says, like walking to ask the ruler to inflict harm on a Muslim unrightfully, or walking to kill a Muslim unrightfully. These are examples of sins because you're taking those steps towards committing a sin. So what this means is if a man has a girlfriend, she's not his concubine, she's not his wife, okay, but he decides to, go pay her a visit with the intention of doing haram things with her, such as telling her he loves her, which is not permissible if you're not married, or kissing her or touching her or the like, then every step he took to get there, every push he did on his gas pedal while driving, all of those things are haram acts, and those are sins of the foot, because he's using his foot to arrive at the place where he intends to commit a sin. Number 2, the unexcused escaping of the slave, the wife, or he who owes a right to others from what is incumbent upon him. Okay, so among the sins of the foot is to run away from your obligations. To run away from your obligations is a sin of the foot. This means that if you're a slave owned by someone, for you to run away from your master is a sin. It's haram. If you're a wife and you run away from your husband, this is a sin. It's haram. If you owe money to someone and you run away so that you don't pay him, that's haram. Or if you owe something else to someone and you run away in order to avoid fulfilling your obligation, these are all cases of things that are haram, because you have obligations that you must fulfill. It says, be it punishment. These are examples now of some examples of obligations that someone might run from, like a punishment. We know that in the Sharia there are statutory punishments. Maybe someone committed zina and now he needs to be stoned. He might run away from this punishment. Okay, this is haram. He needs to take his punishment. Okay, or maybe his punishment is lashing and he runs away. This is haram. Or maybe he killed somebody and the inheritors want him to be executed as punishment, so he runs away. Okay, this is haram because he's running away from what is due upon him. He's running away from the rights that he needs to give to someone else. It says debt. Say it's a debt, like if he owes money to someone, so he runs away in order to avoid paying. That's haram. Obligatory spending, such as if a man runs away so that he does not have to support his wife or so that he does not have to support his children. Okay, these are examples of running away from one's obligations and responsibilities, and this is haram. Here's another one. It says kindness to parents. You know, so like if a person runs away so that he will not need to be kind to his parents, this is haram. He runs so that he won't have to actually show them kindness. This is a haram running away. It says or raising the children. If someone ran off so that he would not have to actually raise his children, this is haram. Okay? Any kind of running away from your obligations is a haram act. Number 3, to walk arrogantly with a strutting gait. Okay. For you to walk in a way that shows that you're arrogant. Where I'm from in Baltimore growing up, there was a certain kind of walk. We used to call it bopping. It was a way to show that you like better than other people. So for you to walk with a bop, that's haram. But in other cultures, there may be a different way to walk and to show that you're arrogant. But in any case, walking in a way that's arrogant is haram. Number 4, to step over the shoulders of people, except for the purpose of filling a gap. What does that mean? I mean, if people are sitting on the ground, which happens, like at Jumu'ah, for example, it happens also at big gatherings. Like say there was a Quran recitation contest and a big crowd of people came to hear it. You might all be sitting on the ground close together. For you to be like lifting your foot up over top of people's shoulders so that you can step over top of them, this is haram. This is haram. What does it say? Except for the purpose of filling a gap. So if there's an empty space up in the front that has not been filled, well, then in that case, it's not haram for you to step over people in order for you to sit in that gap. If those people didn't want to be stepped over, then they should have moved forward and filled the gap. By not filling the gap, it's as if they're saying, I don't mind if you step over me. Number 5, it says to pass in front of the person performing prayer if the conditions of the barrier placed in front of one's prayer place, sutra, were fulfilled. So in the Sharia, it is recommended for the person who's making salat to put something in front of him while he's praying. This thing is called a sutra, and it's like a sign to everybody around him that he's making salat, and he's like designating an area that you should not pass, like a space, and you should not walk in front of him in that space. Okay, this is called a sutra. There are 4 different levels to the sutra. Level number 1, meaning the best kind of sutra, is something that is permanent or like permanent. For example, if you were to pray with a tree in front of you or with a wall in front of you, this is something that's permanent or like permanent. Okay, it doesn't move. And that's the best kind of sutra to have. And just like we said for the barrier when going to the bathroom, this kind of barrier, it will only count as a sutra if it's at least 2/3 of a cubit high and it's no more than 3 cubits away from you. But that's the best kind of sutra to put down when you make salat. So when any of you pray in the musalla or in the masjid or even at your house, you want to make sure that you have a wall in front of you if you can. The next level of sutra below the permanent thing is something movable that you put in front of you when you make salat. So this would be like, for example, putting a chair down and making salat with the chair in front of you. That's the next level down. You should not resort to doing that unless, how do I put this? if you're able to use a permanent thing as a sutra, you should not use a movable thing as a sutra. The third level down is to use like a carpet. So you know how a lot of us have prayer rugs that we put down? This prayer rug counts as a sutra because it's designating a place that's like for you and your salat, and no one should walk through that place. This is the third level down. Using a rug as a sutra is permissible, but you don't want to use the rug alone as a sutra. If it's possible for you to use either something permanent or something movable that stands up that you can put in front of you. And the last and final level of the sutra, if you don't have any of those things, you don't have anything permanent in front of you, you don't have anything movable that you can put in front of you, and you don't have a rug either, then in that case, what you do is you draw a line on the ground. The line should be on the left side of your body. So you don't put the line in front of you, you put the line to your left. So it's like, imagine that you had a prayer rug in front of you, and imagine that you just traced in the ground, like say the ground is sand. Imagine you just traced in the ground right along the left side of that rug. Uh, that's the line that you would write in the ground. Okay, but of course, in this example, there is no rug, but you would just put a line down the left side of your body to indicate the area that you have set aside for your salat, the area that no one should cross. It's just one line. You don't draw a whole box. You just draw one line on the left side of your body. This also counts as a sutra, but you should not resort to that if it's possible for you to have a permanent thing in front of you or a movable thing in front of you or a rug. These are the levels of sutra. So if someone is making salat and they have not put a sutra, none of these kinds of sutras, they have not put a sutra in front of them, well, then in that case, it's not haram for you to walk in front of them. In that case, it's not haram for you to walk in front of them because they fell short in their ibadah by not putting a sutra. If they didn't want anyone walking in front of them, they should have put a sutra. This is the ruling of the Shafi'i school, that walking in front of someone making salat is haram as long as they have a sutra, and that it's not haram if they did not put a sutra. But know that in other madhabs, the ruling is different. In the Hanafi school, for example, it's always haram to put the sutra, to walk in front of someone, whether they have a sutra or not. Okay, so please don't take this lesson here and start thinking that you're just going to start walking in front of people while they're making salat because they don't have a sutra down. It's better to show respect to the salat and not walk in front of the person. Also, in some madhabs, uh, it's not always recommended to put a sutra. In the Maliki school, for example, it's recommended to put a sutra only if you fear that someone might walk in front of you. So, like if you think someone will walk in front of you, then you should put a sutra. But as long as you feel safe that no one's going to walk in front of you, then you don't have to put a sutra, according to the Malikis. Okay, so if you see someone making salat without a sutra, it does not necessarily mean that they fell short, which is the Shafi'i understanding. The Shafi'i understanding is that you should always have a sutra. So if you didn't put one, you're falling short. But according to other madhabs, that's not the case. So my advice to you is to avoid walking in front of people while they're making salat. Someone asked a question. When people like put their hand out in front to block someone from walking across them, is that permitted? Yes, it is permitted. In fact, it is recommended to do that. So if you're making salat and you see that someone is going to walk past you, what you should do, what's recommended and what's rewardable, is for you to put your hand out as like a sign that they should not keep walking. It's like a sign for them to stop so that they don't walk in front of you while you're praying. Yes, this is recommended to do. Number 6, to extend the leg towards the book of the Quran if it is not raised. So know that it is considered disrespectful to stretch your leg out, meaning to make your leg straight, to stretch your leg out with the sole of your foot pointing towards something. Whatever the sole of your foot is pointing towards, we say you're disrespecting that thing. by stretching your leg out in its direction and pointing the sole of your foot at it. This is disrespectful. So if you point your foot at the mushaf, okay, this is clearly haram because you're insulting the mushaf. And insulting the mushaf is kufr. Okay? But it's only haram if the mushaf is A, close to his foot. So say you're in a very, very large building, like, the size of a football field, and you at one end of the building with your legs stretched out, and the mushaf is down at the other end of the building, we would not say that you're insulting it because it's not close enough. A person would not even say you're pointing your foot at it with that kind of distance. No, but if the mushaf is close enough that it appears to someone looking that you're stretching your foot at it, and if the mushaf is not raised up, okay, because sometimes what happens is you're sitting on the floor and you got your foot stretched out, but then the mushaf is up on a table up above, so your foot isn't even pointed at it. Your foot is pointing beneath the table. The mushaf is safely above the table. In this case, it's not haram. What's haram is to stretch your leg out with the sole pointing at the mushaf while the mushaf is at the same level as your foot and close. And this same ruling applies to all of the things that need to be respected in the religion. So any book of Islamic knowledge, you must be careful to make sure you don't point your foot at it. Number 7, to walk in order to abandon an obligation. Okay, so this number 7 is very similar to one that we mentioned earlier, which is to escape, to run away from an obligation. Similarly, just to walk, to abandon an obligation is haram. The difference between this one and the one above it is that for number 2, we were talking about the rights that people have on you, like your right to support your wife, or your right to support your parents, or your right to whomever you wronged, for you to be punished. That's what we were talking about before. This one is actually more general. It's for you to walk away from any kind of obligation, even if it's commanding what's right and forbidding what's wrong. For you to walk away instead of fulfilling your obligation is haram. Any questions about sins of the foot? I see a question here. Someone asks whether unexcused running away includes a married person running from physical abuse in the home. At the time that he's actually physically hitting you, then of course you're permitted to run away in order to protect your own body. But this does not mean that you're permitted to just run away and go stay with a relative for the next 6 months. Okay, the husband has certain rights to your body, and it's your obligation to make your body available to him. So although you can, flee the unjust physical punishment he's giving you, you need to return. You need to return. If he does that sort of thing regularly, then I strongly recommend that you seek some assistance to either get him to stop or perhaps assistance to end your marriage. And for the men, I strongly recommend you not to beat your wives. Our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, the best of you is whoever is best to his wife. And I'm the best to my wife. This is what he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Is it good to your wife for you to be beating her? No. Does this mean, don't all of us want to be the best Muslim that we can be? But the best of us is the one who's best to his wife. That's something you should keep in mind at all times. Whenever you deal with your wife, you should always be thinking, how can I make this an opportunity for me to get reward? You think you're going to be rewarded for hitting your wife unrightfully? That's haram. Rather, you should be kind to her. You should be good to her. And you should always remember that she's in a much more difficult situation than you're in. Okay, it's her job to be pleasing to you all the time, which is not easy. It's not an easy task. It requires a lot of humility and a lot of struggling against your own like your own sense of pride. It's really not easy for a wife to be like a good Muslim wife. So the last thing you should do as a husband is pile on and make it even harder for her. Rather, you should be understanding of what she's going through, and you should deal with her in the way that's in her best interest. Okay, remember that as the man, you are in charge of the family. And on the day of judgment, you're going to be asked not only about yourself, but you're going to be asked about those that you are in charge of, that you were there to take care of. All right, that includes your wife, that includes your children. So you need to ask yourself whether the hitting that you're doing on your wife or on your children, whether you did that in their interests or whether you did that to satisfy, some desire of your own. Because if it wasn't in their interest, you shouldn't do it. If it was not in their interest, you shouldn't do it. Okay, and I say this generally to everyone who's out there. As men, it is our responsibility to look after the whole, to look after the whole group. That's your job as head of the family, is to look after the family. That means every decision you make, it needs to be made with the goal, with the purpose of doing what's best for the whole, what's best for the whole family. Yeah, this is part of what it means to be a man. All right, being a man, it means that you sacrifice. It means that you're always, always, always putting others before yourself. Every decision you make in the family needs to be for the good of the family. If you make even one decision that's for your own good, like not for the good of others, but it's in your interests and not their interests, then this is corruption. This is corruption. You're a corrupt leader if that's the case. It doesn't befit a man to get up there and be a leader and then just look after himself. That's not what leaders do. Leaders look after their flocks. Okay, you can't be the shepherd and be the wolf. It doesn't work that way. Section 9, sins of the body. This one's a long section, so even though we won't finish it today, I want to try to at least get started on it, inshallah. Number 1, to harm one's parents, uquq. This one is an enormous sin. Okay, and also I want to remind you that in the Islamic law, your parent is always your parent, and your responsibilities to your parents are always your responsibilities to your parents. Right? In the Sharia, there is no special age like 18 where suddenly now you don't have to do what your parents say because now you grown. No, no. It doesn't matter if you're 70 years old. If your parents are still alive, they're still your parents and you have to obey them. You have to do what they tell you to do. And you have to respect them and honor them because they're your parents. It's their right as your parents. Okay. And so among the worst sins, among the very serious sins, is for you to harm them in some way. What do we mean by harm? We mean by treating one of them, either one of them, the mother or the father, by treating them in a way which, according to the local norms of that culture, you're treating them in a way that's considered not easy. It's not easy for them. It says in the Quran that you should not say "uff" to your parents. Uff. Uff is like a thing that Arabs used to say. It's not really that different from like in America when a kid sucks their cheek. You ever tell your kid go wash the dishes and they go, that small amount of disrespect? That's what we're talking about. Even that small amount of disrespect there is something that's forbidden. Okay, it's not easy for a parent to deal with that. For the child having the nerve to say to their own parent, that's not easy. So clearly the things that we see nowadays with children threatening their parents and yelling at their parents and et cetera, these things all count as uquq. This is a serious offense. And our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that the person who commits uquq will not enter paradise. Okay, what he means by that is that he will not enter paradise with the first group. Okay, the first group would be the people who go to paradise without any torture. They go to paradise without going to hellfire first. That's the first group. The person who does uquq to their parent will not enter paradise with the first group. Okay, it's as if they're saying they're definitely going to hell. So please um, be mindful of this. Number 2, among the sins of the body is to flee the battlefield. Okay, so if you're part of the Muslim army and you arrive at the battlefield, once you arrive at the battlefield, it's haram for you to flee away from it. So that's considered one of the sins of the body. Unless, of course, the numbers imbalance between the Muslim army and the Kafir army is such that the Kafirs have more than double the number of soldiers. In that case, you're permitted to flee. But as long as it's just, 2 Kafirs for every 1 Muslim, and then you're not permitted to flee, you have to fight. I probably should have mentioned that sins of the body, this is a large section, and it's because the sins that are mentioned here are sins that are not associated with any one part of the body. They're called sins of the body because there are many different parts of the body that could be used to do these sins. Number 3, severing the obligatory ties of kinship. I probably don't need to remind you that as Muslims, we are obligated to maintain ties with all of our kin, whether they're on the father's side of your family or mother's side of your family. Everybody who's considered to be in your family, you need to maintain ties with them. What does that mean? It means that you need to visit them, call them, talk to them. You need to do enough that that person feels as if a connection is there. They don't feel as if they've been cut off. So if someone is in your same town where you live, that means you should go see them in person from time to time. Okay, if someone is not in your town, it means maybe you make a phone call from time to time. And it means that you see each other at the major events like weddings and funerals, for example. Okay, if you do not do this with your kin, this is called severing the obligatory ties of kinship, and it is haram. Number 4, to inflict an apparent harm upon a neighbor. Okay, so neighbors also have rights in Islam. Okay, so if you hit your neighbor or cuss at your neighbor or something like that, this is haram. It says even if he's a blasphemer, as long as he has a granted safety. Okay, so if the kafir is under the protection of the Islamic State or under the protection of a Muslim, then that means that kafir is safe from us. Okay, so we cannot harm him even if it's with words. We cannot harm him. Number 5, to dye the hair black. Okay, for a man or a woman to dye her hair black is haram. Okay, although this is permissible for the man to do if he's fighting in jihad. Only in that case, in the case of jihad, because he's more intimidating to the enemy if he looks like he's young. Number 6, for men to imitate women or women to imitate men in whatever is specific to the opposite sex, clothing or otherwise. Oh boy. Think of the times we're in right now. For a man to imitate a woman, meaning for a man to wear women's clothing, or do any of the things that are for women only, not for men, such as wearing makeup, such as having ears pierced, such as walking or talking a certain way, walking with a switch, for example, or talking in a certain girly way. All of that is haram, and it's among the enormous sins. And similarly, for the woman to imitate men is an enormous sin. So for a woman to wear clothing that's specific to men, it's not unisex. For a woman to wear men's clothing, it's haram. For a woman to get like a men's haircut, that's haram. For a woman to imitate men in any kind of way that's, any kind of action that's specific to men, this is haram. Okay, and of the two, which one do you think is worse? For the man to act like a woman or for the woman to act like a man? Which one is worse? Which one is more severe? Which one is more haram? It's more haram for the woman to act like a man than it is for the man to act like a woman. Number 7, For a man to wear his garment lower than the ankle bones out of vanity, okay, out of vanity or arrogance. So among the sins of the body is for the man's lower garment, like his pants or his izar, or even his thobe, to go below his ankle if it is done out of vanity or arrogance. This is haram. However, if it's not done out of vanity or arrogance, it is not haram. Okay, and most people in the U.S. most people in the U.S. wear their pants below their ankle. Okay, nobody thinks it's arrogant to do that. Nobody here in this culture thinks it's vanity to have your pants go below your ankles. So it's pretty far fetched that anyone in this country has their pants below their ankles because they're vain or because they're arrogant. Okay, no one will even understand that message. Uh, so yeah, for the most part in the U.S., if a person wears pants below their ankles, then this is permissible, although it is disliked. However, if they're doing it out of vanity or arrogance, that's when it's haram. Number 8, for a man to needlessly dye his hands and feet with henna. Okay, this is because it's imitating women. So among the things that's recommended for women is to dye their hair, to dye their hands, and to dye their feet with henna. And when I say dye it, I mean just dye the whole thing. I don't mean put all those elaborate drawings and patterns and flowers and all that stuff that people like to do nowadays. That's not a Muslim tradition. This is something that came to the Muslims from India, put in the fancy patterns with the henna. No, what's recommended is just to dye your whole hand, like the whole thing is just one color of henna, your whole hand or your whole feet, because it's good for the skin. And it's recommended for women to do that, but it's haram for men to do it because it's considered to be imitating women. As for putting henna in the hair, or in the beard, this is something that both men and women can do. Or to be more precise, to put it in the hair is something that both men and women can do. To put it in the beard is something that men do. It's recommended for women to remove hair from their face. If a woman has a beard, then she should pluck it, um, or shave it, or do whatever she needs to do to remove it. Number 9, to interrupt the obligatory worship. Okay. So if a person begins an act of worship, that's an obligatory act of worship, it's haram for him to end it or interrupt it without an excuse. So like if once you start praying Asr, you need to finish it unless you have an excuse. Once you start an obligatory fast, you need to finish it unless you have an excuse. What's an excuse that's permissible for stopping some kind of obligatory action? It would be like to save a Muslim's life. Okay, like say you're in Salat and while you're praying, you see a blind Muslim walking. He doesn't see that there's a big pit in front of him. He's going to walk right into it. So in this case, yes, you break the Salat so that you can yell to him, hey, look out, there's a pit in front of you. This is an excuse. But unless you have an excuse, it is haram for you to interrupt any act of worship which is obligatory. Number 10, and I'll stop at this one because I have to go. Number 10, it says to interrupt the optional Hajj and Umrah. So Hajj and Umrah are the only act of worship where not only is it forbidden for you to interrupt an obligatory Hajj and an obligatory Umrah, but it's actually haram for you to interrupt even the optional Hajj and the optional Umrah. Okay, as for Salat and fasting and other types of worship, if the worship is optional, then you're permitted to interrupt it. But for Hajj and Umrah, you're not permitted to interrupt them. Even if it's optional, you have to see it through to the end. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. If there are any questions, please ask now. Okay, well, in that case, let's say La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات. رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات. رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات. Barakallahu feekum. I'll see you next week at the same time, insha'Allah ta'ala. We'll have 2 more classes after this before I travel, insha'Allah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.